Well, welcome to the Red Chair. Today we have with us David Cristina, longtime friend from Vesalius Biocapital. David, you're from Portugal, but you're now in Brussels, kind of.
Yes.
Tell us, where did it all start? How did you become a VC?
Oh.
And the other stuff you do as well. But tell us the story from the start.
So thank you for having me. This is a pleasure. I've seen some of the episodes. I'm excited to have this conversation today. So it's a long story for me, or maybe not. I will see. So I started as a scientist because I'm trained as a scientist. I did my PhD in the States what seems like many years ago at UCSF. And when I was doing my PhD, I realized I didn't want to just be alone in a lab, moving very small amounts of colorless liquids from one small tube to the other small tube for the rest of my life, because I like people. And I was wondering, what can I do with this, with the work I'm doing? How can I get this to patients? So then I tried many different things. I looked at many different things. And eventually I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. And I tried that for a bit. When I moved back to Portugal, I started a company.
Which year was this?
That's got to be when it was the first year Obama was elected. So I think 2009, I think is when I left.
Something like that.
Right when Obama was being elected. So I was there for most of Bush. So I was sad to leave when Obama was being elected, because in San Francisco, it's very much a blue state, not a blue state, but a blue town. Anyway, so I moved here. I started a company, a cell therapy company out of a research institute. And we raised a little bit of cash, I think with Caixa Capital award even.
Yes.
And then eventually we couldn't scale up the technology in humans as you do. So I ended up closing that. And it was a very interesting experience because I interacted with venture capital. And that's kind of when I started to feel I was probably more geared to be on that. I would prefer to be on that side than on the entrepreneur side. I found the operational side to be challenging, but also I like to look at a lot of different things. And in venture capital, you get to look at a lot of different things.
Right. That's why I love it also, just look at all the different things and think about different problems and so on.
And you can help different teams, right? So this is selfish, right? Hopefully. This is kind of selfish, but I prefer to be a little bit with with each of the teams and spend some time and help them out and then move on to the next thing, than to be like completely focused on one project So I kind of started thinking about that. And eventually I got an offer to go to Portugal Ventures, help them set up their life sciences team there. And I did, and it was very good. It was a different time. There wasn't much life sciences investment, you were doing it. And I think we did some good stuff there, and eventually moved to Fosun, which is a big Chinese conglomerate, where I was heading their healthcare investment platform for Europe. Did a little bit of everything there, from fund of funds, not so much venture, but fund of funds, business development, PE sort of stuff, M&A, what's very interesting. Public markets also very interesting. But eventually wanted to go back to VC, which is what I really like. And that's when, so I started looking, and Vesalius eventually, they were raising the fund 4. They called me in. I've known them for years now. We looked at deals together when I was at Portugal Ventures. So I joined them 3 years ago, I think. 3 years ago. It seems like it was literally 6 months ago. Yeah, but so I'm very happy now. This is, I think, what I really enjoy. Doing.
So tell us about Vesalius. What kind of deals you do?
So Vesalius is a pan-European fund, healthcare, medicalized products. That's kind of the core of it. It started being biotech and a little bit of medtech and diagnostics, and it's migrated over Fund 3. It migrated over Fund 3 and Fund 4. It migrated to digital health and biotech. And the reason for that, we have a lot of core knowledge on biotech, and we think it's still a high growth sector. But digital health has really been outpacing medical devices and diagnostics, in our view at least. And we did well on Fund 3, or they did well on Fund 3. And on Fund 4, we're kind of doubling down, especially with the whole AI, generative AI thing. We think there's just so much low-hanging fruit. So we've done quite a few deals there. So we closed at 115. We're doing 10 investments, probably something like that, maybe 11, maybe 9, it depends.
Per fund.
Yeah, per fund. And, other than that, we're fairly vanilla. I think if we had to be defined, and, we always have to have our own secret sauce. Our secret sauce is something that came along as the company was doing investments. Right? It's not something that was the plan from the start, but our secret sauce, if anything, is we don't follow the herd, right? So we're kind of anti-FOMO. So if there's a sector that's crowded, we we immediately start kind of not wanting to be there. If there's a geography that's crowded, our instinct is to, okay, let's look at another geography. Markets, that's what we've done. And our success stories, and there's a few, luckily, have always been like that. We've done investments that were more FOMO driven. Those did not work out, but the ones where we went somewhere that nobody was looking are the ones that we got the good returns on. So I think don't follow the herd is kind of how we do
So
things.
you shouldn't do AI, definitely.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. This is an important thing you mentioned. Yes and no, because we're not late to AI. So when we started doing digital health, I think, as far as I know, and my knowledge is limited, of course, I think we were one of the first funds in Europe, and at least in our sector, to be doing digital health. So we got into that train very early. So I think compared to a lot of funds, I think we still have a bit of an edge in how we think about these things. But probably for the fifth fund, this will no longer be our main priority because it's too many people will be looking at it.
Everybody's doing AI. AI is part of everything.
Yeah.
So let's go a little bit deeper on that. So digital health, for example, what are the main things that you've been looking at? What are things that excite you?
So, okay, there's things that excite me, and then there's things that excite the fund, and there's one
Hopefully
point.
there's a bit of match.
There's a lot of match, but there's one thing that is different, and that's because we do medicalized products. But I think one area where digital health, and this could be interesting for your fund, one area where I think digital health is huge right now with AI is agentic workflows, which is when you get you know this of course, but it was when you get AI to perform complex tasks and it can go back and forth and eventually go from point A to point B alone and make a set of decisions and take a set of actions. Yeah, in a process, complete process. Not just ask it a question, you get an answer, you tell it, you need to get to point B and it figures it out, right? So this is huge in healthcare, particularly in optimizing all sorts of operational procedures within the healthcare systems. So these are not medicalized products. So for us, it's not a priority. It's software, but it's tremendous because there's so much price pressure on healthcare providers. And there's so much to optimize. Historically, it's typically a not optimized.
Quite inefficient.
Yeah.
Lots of different systems that don't cooperate with each other.
Yeah.
And I think interoperability.
This is huge. Specific you can provide. This is what I think. If you can do this with healthcare systems, and I know because we've been playing around with point solutions versus complete solutions. If you go to a healthcare provider and say, we have a turnkey solution, a complete solution for this problem that starts here and ends here, and it's a complete solution. Sure, you can have human operators in the middle, sure, for validation and whatnot, but it's a complete solution. This is what they want. And you can only get this with agentic AI, right? So if you just offer point solutions, usually those things are good. They're kind of nice to have sometimes, but they're not going to completely solve the operational problem that hospitals need to solve because they basically need to get rid of, to free up people to do other things.
But how do you overcome the challenges of, there's a legacy software and a legacy process, so sales cycles are very long, data protection type of thing. How are you seeing the companies dealing with that, with those issues?
I think slowly, I think is the answer, right? So
slow traction, long sales cycles.
It's true. We're on a couple of companies that are now literally just now, or there's like 3 companies in our portfolio are entering the US market, slightly different stages, but they're doing it right now. And so we get to see the sales cycles. In
the US, it's much faster, right, than Europe?
So, yes, it should be, but at least from one company that we're in, we're having this interesting observation where that's not the case. And we're still trying to figure out why that is, because we did not expect that.
There's probably an incumbent that doesn't want anybody else.
That's blocking it, yeah. Or sales team. Maybe we just need to work on our sales team, because that's what I was going to say. I think on the data protection, that's just working it out right now. There's a lot better regulation around that in the US and Europe. It's clearer, so it's from last year to this year. I think it's fairly clear now. So that's okay. On the sales cycle, it's a long sales cycle. You have to have good sales teams that know how to identify the leads, know who to talk to, to do this very, very structured sales work. If you just kind of go at it without a very specific structure and understanding of the market, the sales cycles become much, much, much longer and unpredictable. So I think, long sales cycle for sure, but if you have a very, very good sales team that understands how things are done in the hospitals, you can shorten them a little bit. But yeah, it's healthcare, right? You end up having to sell to the users, but then the people who pay are a different group of people, and then the people who evaluate the tech are a different group of people. So that's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
In our experience, having good KOLs and having some top approvals, plus upselling once you get approved, right? So you get it in, and then you get through all the BS that you have to go through. Then you can upsell things within your software framework. That's a great way to keep increasing your revenue without having to go through the cycle every time. So
So you also do, I mean, this is our area, and we'd like to do deals in that area. In fact, we just closed the common deal in one of our portfolio companies, but you also typically have done biotech, right? Yeah. So what do you look for? We know what we look for when you're doing digital, right? But what do you look for when you're doing
biotech,
traditional biotech?
That's a good question, and the reason that's a good question is because, and this is going to sound cliche, but every company is kind of their own story, right? So I'll tell you what kind of baseline. Baseline, we'll look for companies that are close to the clinic or in the clinic already.
Can you explain that?
Sorry.
What does it mean?
Sorry, you're right. So biotech companies, what they do is they develop drugs, right? So usually it comes from very early research findings. Then they have to do these preclinical studies, usually in mice or whatever, where they show that what they think the drug is doing, it is doing, at least in mice. And then you can bring it to humans and try it in clinical trials, first for safety to see if it's safe to use. That's obviously the number one priority. And then for efficacy, and eventually you get high numbers that's statistically significant. It gets approved by the regulatory bodies such as FDA in the US, EMEA in Europe, and then you can sell these drugs. It's very high. It's very, very regulated. You really can't. And this is a very simplified version of it. What we like to invest in drugs that are already going to be tested in humans, already being tested in humans. So we don't so much invest in the stages before that.
Research,
animal
models.
Yeah. We don't so much do that. We can, but it's not our preferred area of investment. So that's what we like. And these days, because valuations are fairly low, the markets have been tough, you can actually get some pretty good pre-money valuations on assets or companies that are already in the clinic. Whereas, go back 8 years or even 5 years maybe, and the valuations were through the roof, right? So you'd always have to go super early.
What happened? Why are they more adjusted to reality right now?
I think there's just less money around, I think there's a couple of things going on. Well, there's less money around, less VC money around for earlier stage projects, because there's been good fundraisers in Europe in general, but for later stage funds, so you don't have that much early stage
Is that because the funds don't want to have so much risk because the investors in the funds don't want to be exposed to so much early stage risk?
I'm not sure, but I think it's a story that there was a hole in the market in Europe for later stage funds, for these crossover funds in biotech. It just wasn't there. And I think a lot of the big funds, the big reputation funds, they came to the LPs and said, look, there's a gap here. Why don't you come in and fill it?
Late stage.
And these are much bigger funds, right? Because they tend to be less risky, but much higher capital needs. And I think they kind of all had this conversation. They all raised these funds
and they left the early stage.
Yeah. And now you kind of have this, if you look at just absolute capital, there is absolute capital, but it's not distributed evenly. So I think there's a bit of lack of capital for early stage stuff. And because the valuation started going down, you're seeing this interesting dynamic where a lot of cool companies are just not going to the market. There's a lot of cool companies I would like to invest in, I don't get to see, because they're just doing internal rounds because they don't want to deal with the low valuations. So that, I think, for the other companies that are around, pushes valuations even lower because they're not the hot, sexy companies, right? So you end up with these things what we quite like, which is these just amazing value deals that if you do dig in and if you do look carefully at the value of the assets, there's something really interesting there and something really cool there that superficially may not be sexy or trendy, but it is good, and it once validated could be a really good.
So what are the things that you look for exactly in those deals? In addition to value, good value, because it lowers the risk of the fund, of course, and increases the returns for the investors.
Exit potential, right? We look at, so these days, is it good? Is it fairly de-risked? Is the science there? Are they doing it once they're doing it in humans, what does the data look like? Are they designing the clinical trials well? Because it's a huge problem. If you design it poorly, you can spend a lot of money and in the end, you just don't get an answer to your question, right? So that's the stuff we look at. And then very, very importantly, will pharma buy this? Is there a market? What is the competition right now and the upcoming competition? Is there pharma interest? Because sometimes you have something that is a real market need. It's cool.
But pharma is not.
But pharma just doesn't want to do it. Yeah, because
and that's the way you sell the companies. You sell it to big pharma companies, basically. Right?
And sometimes pharma will just not want to buy because it's not their sector. They're not interested, they're not excited about it because they had a big failure in that particular space before, so they don't want to bet. Yeah, it's a real thing, by the way. If you lose money on an asset class, a lot of times you just, I'm never touching this again. Right. You're done with that.
Go wrong anyway.
Yeah. So I think that those are things that we do look at. We talk to a lot of pharma before we do the deal to make sure, is there interest? What do you want to see? If we bring you this, what would you like to see to buy? And then we make sure that the company can do that. And we help the company kind of provide that data so that we can then sell it.
So in a way, it's more collaborative than on the digital side, right? Because it's difficult to get hold of big corporates in digital to ask, what would you like to buy? In terms of software. I mean, it used to be like that, but it's no longer because the market is so huge. So in biotech, you can still have that conversation, see if the data is correct, see if it's well designed, if the studies are well designed, if the company has that expertise inside, and then, get together with pharma and say, if we do this, if the numbers are right, would you buy it? For how much? Yeah. Maybe not for how much, but for what multiple of something.
But you get an idea.
You get an idea and you see if the multiple makes sense. So it's a more structured market. It's harder, probably higher risk than software, but it's actually, the process is more clear.
I think so. It's more binary than software for sure, because if a clinical trial fails miserably,
that's it.
That's kind of it. I mean, sometimes they can just not do so great and you can pivot it around and there's some really good stories there too.
Right.
But usually if it just fails miserably, the value kind of goes away a little bit. But it's true. I mean, pharma is more engaged. I mean, pharma will start conversations with these companies early on, very early on, and kind of nudge them in the right way. Say, what about this? Can you maybe do this? Because pharma needs this, right? I read recently that by, I think it's 2029 or 2030, 40% of pharma's revenue is going off the patent cliff. Right, 40% is going off patent, which
so
is going to be
lose 40% of the revenues or close to that.
Well, they don't lose 40% of the revenues instantaneously, but they'll stop. It starts getting cut by generics, right? Some of it they hold on usually. I forget how much it is. It's well studied, but they still hold on to some of that revenue. But it's no longer growing for sure, and it's just declining. So they need new innovation.
And of course, the research and the new drugs and the new molecules and so on, they are really coming from these startups. They're not coming from inside the big pharma companies.
Not anymore. Yeah. Not anymore. It used to be that big pharma they had their own R&Ds and that was a big part of what they're making. These days, I think somehow or somewhere they figured out it was more efficient to produce them outside.
Yes. So it's kind of more distributed research and development capacity all over the world, right? Which is interesting in a way.
Yeah, I think you can kind of understand why that would be, right? Because a small startup financed by VCs, pressure, it creates a situation where people tend to be more efficient than I think in big pharma.
There's an incentive on alignment between all the parties when you have a startup and the VCs and the LPs, as opposed to being inside a big corporate where maybe taking that much risk is not not in the best interest of the shareholders in the public market and stuff like that, right? So they might as well buy it when things are kind of working out.
And they don't mind paying more because they will pay more.
Right. No, because otherwise they would waste money some other way doing it internally. And do you think that now of course, the regulatory process is going through all those hoops and the regulators and the clinical trials, different phases, but with the introduction of AI, this Eldorado of, we do not need a wet lab. We can have just, the computers doing how far are we from actually, finding new medicine to, increase longevity just with a computer?
Just with
and
a
AI.
computer. Okay. So it's a very good question. And I'm actually reading a book on this general line of thinking in Silicon Valley. So, okay. So we're not that far from being able to create, whatever that means, generate, optimize drugs using AI. Because there's already some news, finally, after many years, there's already some news of drugs that are entering the clinic and are making it through phase 2. I think it's Insilico that just has a drug in phase 2 just now. But that's not the same as simulating a full human body with disease states. I think we're very far from that, extremely far from that. If ever, in the near future with the technology that we have, it's
So you think
achievable.
that the clinical trials will still be needed? I mean, you can design the drug maybe with all the combinations in the near future, but actually to test it, you have to test it in humans,
Yes,
in animals, and then in humans at some stage.
yes. It will vary depending on the system that you want to test. I mean, you can build a simpler system that addresses a specific disease, and that's because diseases are not all the same, right? So you can design a simple system for testing some things, and it might work. You can definitely test how this molecule connects to this molecule and optimize that. And that's important for treating the
that
diseases.
speeds up the research phase.
Yeah,
of course.
exactly.
What you can't speed up probably is the trials.
It's very hard to predict for most diseases how you could do that, because there's so many molecular mechanisms at stake that we don't fully understand or are able to quantify, that talk to each other, that it's just very challenging to do something like that. So I'm not very optimistic on that, but that's because I'm a biologist. You see, if you come at this from the tech side, these guys are like, the body's just a machine, we can figure it out. And I go like, well, the machines you figured out are machines that we made. Simpler. Yeah, exactly. You're just figuring out machines that we made, right? So it's like when people say, oh yes, but they said AI couldn't beat a man at chess. I'm like, chess is a very simple man-made game. Exactly. Right? It's not the same
as the human body, or the brain,
which is even more complicated. Whenever I hear people talking about mapping the human brain and putting the human brain into a computer, it's like, oh, I don't even know where to begin on how difficult that would be. Not to mention that the human brain doesn't exist without the experience of the body, right? This seems esoterical, but it's not. We really only exist because we have a full experience. If you were to take consciousness and put it without the body, I don't know what would happen, but you would not be a happy camper. You'd probably go crazy or something. So yeah, I'm not as optimistic about that as some people are, but I do think it's a wonderful tool. And it's going to get more and more disseminated, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to optimize a lot of drug development.
Right.
Yeah.
So it probably open up the class to lots and lots of new trials. And so the market for trials is going to explode probably because there's so many
new
options and new drugs, and we might live longer.
Yeah, just from not dying, which is good.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
And so what have been the mistakes you've seen, entrepreneurs on the digital and then on the biotech side? What do you think are the big lessons learned?
So on the digital side, this is more kind of closer to my experience today. I don't know how you are, but I'm always just talking about the things that are happening to me today, usually. So I think sales is frequently, the importance of sales is frequently not taken seriously enough, right? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to scale in, particularly in the US, and they don't fully grasp that it's all going to be about sales now. It's all going to be about sales. You just have to build a sales system. You got to get the best people doing these sales that know how to do them, structure it well, and then execute perfectly. And that's, I think I cannot state this enough, because I think let's say you spend 5 years developing your product, right? And then you started to do some sales, whatever. And then you go, okay, Series A, I'm going to scale up in the US. I'm going to explore. It's a different company. Your mentality of product, it's sales, right? At least in my neck of the woods, because we don't do direct to consumer. I mean, you can always argue some things direct to consumer can scale on their own. Sure. We don't do that. I don't understand how that works.
And quite often the European companies think that with their existing sales in whatever country they're from, they'll be able to conquer the US. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, the Americans don't care about Europe, right? I think I honestly, and I don't mean this as I lived there for a long time. I don't mean this with any disrespect, but I don't think they really respect how things are done here. So if you go to an American and say, "Look, we tested this in Portugal," they're like, "What is Portugal?" That's the first thing you're probably gonna get. Is like, well, I'm not really. Well, they know what Portugal is now because they're moving here, but they don't. They go like, "Oh, that's very nice for you," right?
Thank you. Now let's start.
Yeah. Now let's start from scratch here, and we'll see what. So yeah, I think that's a lot of just underestimating of what the sales process is going to be. I think is a big,
and that influences your product, obviously, right? It might be different requests, different requirements, more demanding customers.
Yeah,
so it might influence actually the product development.
Of course, yeah. And on the biotech side, maybe similar, but not on the sales because we don't really do sales. It's on understanding the exit and comparing your molecule or your product to everything else that's on the market. Because it's so frequent that you go and talk to these folks and they always say, "Oh, mine is better than all the others." And you go and you ask them, "But why?" And they're like, "Oh, because there's this particular thing that ours is very good at." Like, I'll give you an example without citing the company. So there's a company that was like, our competitors, they have a black box warning on their drug. Black box means that it has some severe side effects, and ours is not going to have that. It's a safer drug. And sure, this is good, obviously. But then you talk to physicians who are prescribing this, and a lot of them that we spoke to, at least, are just like, "Yeah, we don't really care so much about the black box. We prescribe it anyway."
Right. Because people just want to get it solved.
Yeah, because people
they have side effects, they'll let us know. But you want to get the disease solved.
So the doctor's is like, "Yeah, it's not a big deal for us." And of course, this may not be true, by the way. This may just be the guys we spoke to because we didn't speak to every physician. But we see this recurrently, right? So I think a lot of times the companies overestimate their value proposition. So you need to go talk to pharma and you need to go talk to physicians and you need to just ask them, if this goes out, would you buy it? Would you want to use it? Do you think it's good? And pharma will tell you for sure. They're like, "Yeah, it's good," or "No, we probably wouldn't use it." And then just don't pursue it because, it's just going to be an uphill battle for you to get it, to someone to acquire it. Once it's acquired, for someone to actually be able to sell it. So that's the sort of thing I think is frequently underestimated because it's not as exciting as science. The science is super cool, right? You're looking at it.
It's like the engineers that really like their engineering and stuff. Although, have you had the experience that on the science side, people are less business aware than the engineering side, maybe?
Yeah,
that's experience.
100%. I mean,
and so it makes it harder to sort of get them to understand, and probably need more experienced people on the science-based company rather than an engineering company because the level of experience in business is lower when you're on the science side. So you need to compensate with more years of experience.
Typically, it's very rare that we're lucky because we operate across Europe. So it's very rare that we would see a founder team where the research scientist is managing the company. It's very rare. I off the top of my mind, I found, some of them were former researchers who've then moved on to pharma, did BD maybe, and eventually were CEOs before they started this venture. But it's rare that you see like a pure out of the bench CEO running a company. You don't usually see that. And I don't think we would want to invest in a company like that just because there's so much learnings that need to be done before you can, do that. With digital is very different, right? We do want the founder team to be, the guys that were coding in the beginning, those usually become the founding team and they take the company throughout. So it's very funny. I think we spoke about this recently in a panel that, founder teams in digital, we want to keep them for as long as we can. We want to, usually we take smaller stakes. They have a bigger stake in the company and we just keep them for as long as we can. In biotech, we change them often, and typically the founding team has a bit of a smaller stake in the company, and the investors also it's more capital intensive, right? But the investors take a bigger chunk.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and now just to finish our conversation, you have a side gig. Mm-hmm. You must be one of the few VCs in the world that sometimes is not taken very seriously.
I don't know of any others, and that's a good thing, I think. Yeah. So when I was in college, I don't usually talk about this because these worlds don't, connect. So when I was in college, I started doing kind of comedy, right? Theater, whatever. And I just never stopped, right? Because people would always, I do stand up now and a few other things as a hobby. And people, whenever they see me doing stand up, they're like, how did a VC start doing stand up? I'm like, well, I'm more like a stand up that started doing VC. So I just never stopped doing comedy. So yeah, it's a side gig. And it's a lot of fun. And it's very interesting because I'm usually, as a VC, I'm not particularly, in my job, I'm not particularly funny. So it's because it's not a funny thing to do, right? You're not cracking jokes when you're talking about where you're investing people's money. So people have a hard time understanding these two realities. But yeah, I know, I love it. It's when you're on stage doing jokes that you wrote, you really can't think about anything else, right? You literally have to be 100%, and I hate to say it because it's a cliche, but you have to be 100% in the moment. Right. There's no way for you not to be present there, dealing with the things that are happening.
To react very quickly. But I mean, your shows, the one I've seen, I mean, it's the most hilarious, politically incorrect stuff, yes. which is wonderful and the breath of fresh air in today's day and age. And so it's amazing. So here we go. We have a comedian VC.
It's fun.
There might be a few others, but I don't know them. And it's an amazing
I'd love to know some more. Yeah, I'd love to know some more comedians. But it's funny how I think comics in general are kind of they're very critical. So I know I hang out with a lot of comics, as you can imagine. They're very critical thinkers just because they have to constantly observe the world and kind of have opinions. There is a bit of an overlap with venture capital because I think what we do here
certainly take risks.
They take risks. We take risks for sure, and we're just always. I think a big part of our job is judging, constantly judging, and then constantly making decisions with imperfect information. And I think the comedians don't make any decisions, right? But they're constantly judging, right? Looking at things and trying to look at things from a different perspective, and always trying to look behind the curtain to see what's going on.
Out of the box thinking, for sure.
Yeah.
Where do you do your stand-up comedy so that people can go and check it out?
So I used to be a resident at Lisbon Comedy Club, but these days I have to say the venture work has been a lot. So I've stopped with that. I just do shows here and there. These days, I don't have a show, but I'll probably go do a small tour in starting January, I think. I'll probably do a small tour with a show that I have called Animal de Palco, which is, I don't know how to translate it. Stage animal, yeah. Which is it's a show about shame and embarrassment. Right. It sounds very kind of upbeat, but it's funny, but it's about all the embarrassing stories that have happened to me, and I've had so many embarrassing stories. Sure. So yeah, so it's that. No, it's a good thing. But I've tried before. People often ask me, would you give up, your venture activity to do comedy? And people have asked me the other way around, would you give up comedy if venture was too much? I think it'd be very hard for me to give up venture because I like it so much and it's so intellectually stimulating. And I feel like I've worked all my life to be able to now have the pleasure to do this. But I don't know if I could completely quit comedy either, right? So what I do now is, I dedicate the vast majority of my time to venture, but I'll always have, a little time to go and do a show here or there. When I'm traveling, I'll sometimes do shows. I've done shows in Shanghai, San Francisco, London, because you can always find a little show and you finish your meetings and you go and just do,
And how can people follow you?
Oh, my Instagram is Senhor Cristina. So Mr. Cristina in Portuguese, because my last name is Cristina. And there's like, isn't that a girl's name? So I said, Senhor Cristina.
That is a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
Well, David, it was great to have you here.
Good to have you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Red Chair, and see you another time.